Welcome back to The Explainer. So today, we're looking at one of the absolute most fascinating and, frankly, kind of unsettling quirks of human psychology, the Messiah complex. We're going to clinically analyze exactly how these incredibly dangerous personality traits literally translate into godlike leadership in the minds of everyday people. We're breaking down the architecture of apotheosis, which I know sounds like a mouthful, but it's really just a fancy way of saying how a normal human being gets turned into a god. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this with a question that sits right at the center of the whole paradox of human hierarchy. Think about it. If equality is our ultimate ideal, why on earth do we end up worshiping toxic leaders? Modern civilization constantly preaches egalitarianism, democracy, equal rights, all of that. And yet, pretty much everywhere we look, and throughout literally all of recorded history, humans have shown this terrifying willingness to submit to highly dominant, deeply flawed, and honestly brutally toxic rulers. So why? Well, to find the answer, we actually have to look way past politics and dig straight into our evolutionary biology.
Now, the surface phenomenon we're observing here is what's known as the cult of personality. It's essentially the conscious shaping of a leader into this idealized, heroic, almost deified figure through constant propaganda, manipulation, and mass media exposure. And I want to be super clear right up front. For this explainer, we are maintaining strict clinical neutrality. We're treating political and historical movements, whether they lean left or right, strictly as subjects of psychological and sociological study. So we aren't here to judge the politics at all. We're here to understand the actual mechanics of the human mind that make these cults of personality just so incredibly effective. To really wrap our heads around this phenomenon, we've got to recognize one basic fact. The human brain is hardwired for hierarchy. It's not some modern invention. This is survival of the ranked. You see, our neural wiring is inherited straight from our prehistoric tribes and primate ancestors. For hundreds of thousands of years, recognizing rank and deferring to authority, that wasn't just a polite suggestion. It was literally a matter of survival. Hierarchy reduced constant, bloody conflict. So our brains evolved to detect, respect, and align with powerful individuals because, historically, that's exactly what kept us alive.
Now, evolutionary psychology points out that there isn't just one single way to climb this social ladder. Researchers actually called this the dual strategies theory. So on one hand, we have the prestige strategy, which is often linked to the Confucian ideal. This is a kind of status that is freely conferred by a group because, the leader shares knowledge, they act as a role model, and they display this really authentic pride. But then on the other hand, we have the darker pathway, the dominance strategy, or the Machiavellian approach. And this status, it is not given, it's taken. It relies entirely on force, coercion, threat, and what psychologists call hubristic pride.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what we're talking about. It clinically separates these two distinct leadership archetypes across all sorts of different mammalian societies. We're talking everything from matriarchal killer whales and small-scale human societies that lead through prestige, all the way to the dominance-style leadership you see in male baboons and, well, modern political figures. The underlying emotional bonds are just completely different here. Prestige triggers admiration and voluntary deference, but dominance? Dominance triggers fear, submission, and a whole lot of social anxiety. Which brings us to a really critical analysis of what actually makes these dominant-style leaders so incredibly successful at seizing control. They very often possess what psychologists call the dark triad of personality traits: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Now, in a civilized, everyday society, we obviously view these as highly dangerous traits. But when you look at the primal architecture of a dominance hierarchy, they actually provide this absolutely ruthless advantage. A leader with these traits just completely excels at coercion, intimidation, and selfishly hoarding resources. They really don't care about being liked, they care about maintaining absolute control. And the crazy thing is, our prehistoric brains are wired to submit to that kind of raw display of power. And this isn't just some modern psychological discovery either. Historical thinkers totally understood the effectiveness of the dark triad way before we ever had the clinical terminology for it. Just look at Niccolo Machiavelli. He famously observed, "Since love and fear can hardly exist together, if we must choose between them, it is far safer to be feared than loved." He basically recognized that the dominance pathway, that path of fear and coercion, creates a much more stable grip on power than the prestige pathway of love and admiration.
But here is where the story takes a super fascinating turn. How exactly does a leader who relies entirely on coercion, intimidation, and fear somehow transform into a revered messianic figure? Like, how do we get from a terrifying thug to an adored god? Well, this process is what researchers call the architecture of apotheosis.
It's basically the sociological mechanics behind turning a dominant, ruthless ruler into a sacred, completely unassailable deity in the minds of the public.
Let's move to and see how this builds step by step. Historian Jan Plamper outlined how this architecture is constructed through 5 key characteristics of modern cults. First up, they always claim legitimacy from the people, not some divine right. Second, they really focus on these hyper-masculine, paternal figures. Third, they target the entire population, across all classes. Fourth, they rely heavily on mass media to literally manufacture charisma. And fifth, and this is the absolute most important one, they completely monopolize that media to crush any rival narratives. This exact social engineering blueprint has been used by figures ranging from Stalin and Mao to Hitler and even by modern political populists all over the globe today.
But that begs the question, why does the public actually fall for all this media manipulation? Well, to understand that, we have to peel back the final layer of our psychological onion here. The root cause behind this kind of charismatic submission is explained by something called terror management theory, or TMT. This theory basically states that the absolute deepest, most powerful driver of leader worship is our own paralyzing awareness of our mortality. We are the only animals capable of truly understanding that we are going to die one day, and that realization, it creates a profound, latent existential terror inside every single one of us.
So, when we are faced with existential dread, whether that's coming from war, an economic collapse, or massive social upheaval, our standard rational defenses just kind of shut down. We naturally project this desperate desire for a secure base onto charismatic authority figures. We basically want a powerful, dominant father figure to step in and protect us from the chaos and the terror of ultimate annihilation. And in exchange for the psychological comfort of their protection, we willingly elevate them to a sacred status. We literally trade our critical thinking for an illusion of absolute safety.
And a wild thing is, we can actually measure this mortality salience clinically in modern populations. The perfect example of this is the 9/11 effect. Right after the September 11 terrorist attacks in the U.S., President George W. Bush's approval ratings skyrocketed by almost 50%, practically overnight. Why? Because the population was experiencing acute mortality salience. Their personal security was intensely threatened, and the psychological reflex was to just immediately rally behind a protective, dominant leader who promised moral clarity and safety. That is just human biology operating exactly as it was designed to.
So the crucial point is, what actually happens when this evolutionary vulnerability is exploited? We get the true pathologies of hierarchy worship. When societies forget their biological wiring, hierarchy stops organizing cooperation and it just starts producing systemic abuse. Personality cults completely replace actual accountability. Corruption flourishes because honestly, no one dares question the leader. Institutional abuse becomes the new normal. Our blind obedience actually overrides our own internal moral instincts, and any form of political dissent, it's no longer treated as just a disagreement, it's treated as religious impiety. It's seen as a literal sin against the Messiah. Now, as we step into the future, this ancient biological glitch of ours is finding a brand new target. It's called the synthetic transcendent. You see, our brains possess what's called a hyperactive agency detection device, or HAD. It's this evolutionary instinct that makes us just assume there's a conscious agent pulling the strings behind complex events. Ironically, the exact same neural mechanism that created ancient god kings and modern political cults is now predisposing us to bow down to server racks. We are becoming hardwired to project divine authority onto complex artificial intelligence systems. We are quite literally predisposed to worship the algorithm.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly important question to chew on. Does our modern technology make us more immune to the next dark triad messiah, or, surrounded by monopolized media algorithms and deep-seated existential anxieties, are we actually more vulnerable than ever? The architecture of apotheosis is still fully functioning right there inside your own brain. The real question is, now that you can clearly see the blueprint, will you still fall for the illusion? Thank you so much for watching this explainer. Keep questioning everything, and I'll see you next time.